Welcome to Open the Aperture, a video series brought to you by imgix. In this video series, we look to shine more light on important topics about digital assets on the web. We will explore best practices for your images, animations, CDN, and video in an ever-evolving technological landscape. Let's get started. Hi. My name's Tom Dale, Head of Customer Success here at imgix. Today, we're going to go over how to properly resize images for optimal page speed and image quality. This is part 2 of a 4-part episode on optimizing images for page speed. I want to welcome back our guests, Ty and Andrew of Cantilever, a web design and development consultancy. Thank you so much for joining me again today.
Hi, Tom.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm really excited about today's topic. It is such a basic idea for image optimization, but it can be really tricky or even time-consuming to really properly size all your images. I mean, it depends even what you're doing, right? Like, are you manually sizing them all? Are you using different services? So this can just be such a nightmare for someone, right? But it really is just at the core heart of what you should do with your images. When you're building a website or app, you want to ensure you load the right size images. You know, the most obvious reason is that if it's going to load faster, if you have the right size image, right? I mean, you know, having unnecessarily large images can also mean, though, that you're wasting user cellular data. You can spend an excessive amount of money on CDN costs if you're just pushing those through your CDN. So there's a lot of good reasons why you should properly size your images. You know, I'm kind of wondering, Ty, when clients come to you to talk about images being the wrong size, what kind of concerns are they typically sharing with you?
Yeah, so usually our clients don't think about it too much until we inform them of how large of an impact it can have on their users' experience and on their actual hard costs, as you mentioned. But when we're working on websites that are serving lots and lots of people, those costs can be pretty substantial, and the effect on the ultimate effectiveness of the website is pretty substantial as well. So in a case where if we were to serve 50% more bandwidth than needed, that means people are waiting 50% longer to get information or to start reading something, and you're going to see pretty substantial drop-offs and a depression of user satisfaction in that case. So it's crucially important in our view, not just to get images mostly right, but to really get images perfect when it comes to websites that we're building that are going to be serving, hundreds of thousands of uniques a month, because the effects can actually be really, really substantial.
And I can certainly remember the day that I first started working at imgix, I didn't realize that even though when I look at a site and see the images, that they're not actually being loaded that size, or potentially not, right? Because you're just using CSS, like you said, to choose the width and the height of the image, but who knows what you're actually loading behind that, right? And that's something of an issue I think people have a hard time getting their head around is, oh, it's not actually that size, I'm loading this humongous one, right? Or dive in way further, like you said, responsive design. Now you need all these different options for every version. Now, Andrew, you work on a lot of the technical limitations at Cantilever. Can you maybe shed some more light on the idea of, an example of how you size images typically or correctly?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to making things easy for the content manager on the website, especially when you're building CMS-driven websites. Content managers are going to want to kind of set and forget their images, upload one, probably at high quality, and then be able to rely on the idea that that's going to be implemented effectively anywhere that it's being used. We know that kind of in a general sense, without leveraging a tool like imgix, that's really hard to manage on a front-end perspective. Like Ty said, oftentimes you're building multiple kind of versions of the same image and having to house all of them. You're implementing a picture element with an SRCSET in order to try and get the right sizes to the right devices at the right time. And all of that can be done. It's all technically possible. It just requires a lot of thought and process and work. And why would you do that if you didn't have to? And why would you do that if, 6 months down the road, the standards could change, the implementation in the browsers could change, and you may need to revisit that work. Again, that's why we as a development organization love imgix, because it's always being updated, it's doing the latest thing, and it's making sure that our images are always served and our clients are happy.
Now, we do have a good demo for like a manual source set example, right? Do you want to go over that now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to share my screen here and I'll show you an example that I found online. And this is a website that it's actually in the top 100 websites in the world in terms of traffic. And so this is a website where the homepage is actually getting loaded many, many, many times by many, many different people. And I found that they actually have an implementation on their homepage where the images are not sized correctly. So if you look particularly at this image here, I'll inspect this in the Chrome inspector. And you can see that the image file here is actually 1280 pixels wide, but the image itself on screen is only 412 pixels wide. And so that means that, on a 1x DPI, a non-retina display, you're wasting maybe 80% of that bandwidth. Even on a high DPI display, you're still wasting a substantial amount of bandwidth. And this image is 37K when it could be much, much smaller. And so imgix helps you solve this problem. First of all, you can create different versions of images very, very easily by using the URL-based API, which I'll demonstrate in a moment. But imgix also provides different tools for sort of automatically generating different versions of images to solve this problem without you really having to think too deeply about what the image's actual size is or generate different specific sizes for different cases. So here I'm going to show you a demo that I built from the actual source code of that website, where all I've done is it looks exactly the same. I just cut off the bottom of the page. And all I've done is I took this image and I replaced it with a copy that I am running through imgix. And this is actually running through Cantilever's imgix distribution, which it powers the images on our own website. And so you can see here, this is the very basic format of an imgix image. And if you're not familiar with this, I'm sure we can link to the documentation for the URL-based API for imgix. But the basic idea is pretty intuitive. It's that you have a core URL for your image, which in this case ends with the file extension there. And then in the query string, you're able to specify different parameters that you want to request that imgix transforms your image by. And so you can change the width of it, you can change the height, you can crop it in different ways, you can change the format or encoding, as we're going to get into in a future video. There's also tons and tons of other options. You can change the color space, you can make things grayscale, you can crop to faces, all of these different fancy things. But as an immediate solution, just getting an image that's at the right size can be a big win. So I'll just pull this image up in a new tab and show you. So this is kind of the transformed version. And if I were to remove this parameter, we get the original size here. And there's nothing special about this version. I didn't generate this in advance. This is being generated on the fly. So if I want to just go in here and specify a different width, I get a different width. And every time that happens, imgix will cache the results. So the next time this image has to be loaded with these parameters, it happens super, super fast. So that's a great solution. But if you have a responsive website where your images show up at lots of different sizes, or you want to art direct your images, you're going to need a more robust responsive image implementation. And I can't get fully into the ins and outs of how responsive images work. Again, we can add a great link below that we use internally to align all of how we think about it. But what I've done here is I've just created a quick demo of how you could make a responsive image tag using imgix to sort of start to solve this problem for this particular website. So on the screen now, I pulled up the demo that I created where it's the same image, but instead of it just being a simple image tag, we now have an image tag with a source set. And the source set describes different versions of this image, which the browser will select based on a number of criteria. The first criteria obviously is the size of the image, which is why we have this sizes tag here. And that's going to tell the browser how large we expect the image to be. But the browser also takes into account your DPI, or the resolution of your screen, and even your bandwidth in certain situations to determine which version of an image it wants to grab. And all I've done here is I just manually sort of hard-coded two different versions of this image, one that shows up at 300 pixels wide and below, and one that shows up at 500 pixels wide. And as Tom said, I don't have to decide in advance that I want to generate a 500 pixel wide version on imgix, I can just change that parameter in the code and I'll immediately get that version. There's nothing that has to be pre-done. It's all done on the fly. So if I change my view to the full page, I'll be able to show you how it's selecting that particular image because of the final size of the image asset. So you see the tag here. It has the two different versions, and you can see there the intrinsic size is the 500 pixel wide version. And it picked that because the image is being rendered at 412 pixels wide, and it's also on a high DPI screen that I have here. So it's going to select the version that best fits that situation, which is the 500 pixel wide size. And I could continue to add all sorts of different sizes to make this more and more and more efficient and in line with the exact situation that I'm presenting to the user. But the challenge then is that you might end up with 10, 15, or 20 different versions, and you have to specify to use this one at a certain width and use this one when it's retina display and use this one when it's not. And that gets out of hand very, very quickly. So it's very possible to code a solution like that into your PHP-based CMS, or even to hard code it or build it into your React application or whatever. But imgix has actually done all of that work for you and created a really useful little library that generates a very, very complicated source set that allows you to very precisely target the exact situation that your user is in. And that's the last solution that I'm going to show you here.
Yeah, Ty, I could feel it coming. I was like, I know Ty has a easier and better way of doing this. It's coming up. I know it.
And even if we look at that one, the file size is already significantly decreased just based on the payload that you're delivering.
Yeah, I think it was like from 36 to 24 kilobytes, right? So that's like a 33% reduction in the image already, right?
And we're not even on the good version yet.
Yeah.
So the last demo that I'll show is how imgix's JavaScript library generates these source sets. And the key thing to understand is that imgix does not have to generate all of the different versions of the image that you're about to see in the image tag. All it's doing is generating instructions for the browser to fetch the right image asset from imgix after the browser has decided which image size it needs. So the browser is going to go through some calculations based on the situation and figure out, I'm going to grab the 800 pixel wide version, or I'm going to grab the 1000 pixel wide version. And it'll do that based on controls that you have as a developer. And imgix is there to render that image when needed. So I know that's a little confusing, so I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about here. The first thing to note is that we have a different kind of format to this image tag. And the reason is that this is not going to be the final format of this image tag that the browser is going to render. This will go over the wire in the HTML, but imgix has a JavaScript snippet, which I've included in this page called imgix.js, that transforms this markup into a final image source set that the browser can actually parse. So this image tag is constituted. The browser doesn't know what to do with this. It doesn't have a source. It doesn't have a source set. And imgix.js creates a very complex but very precise source set to use. So I'll show you the full page view here and we can dig into it. I'll inspect the image. And voila. Here we see what the image looks like after imgix.js has processed it. So you just saw what it looked like in the original HTML that gets sent to the browser. This is what it looks like after it's been processed. And it looks totally insane. And we have a lot of folks who are newer to imgix, and when they see this kind of thing on our website, they get concerned that maybe we're generating 20 different versions of images, or that we have this really complex code that's going to be hard to work with on the back end. But it's not. This is sort of a temporary configuration that's made specifically for this user and for their browser to be able to pick a version of this image that's going to be optimal for them. And so we go back to looking at this thumbnail, and if I go to my network panel, it'll actually show me the specific version of the image that it chose to render. And here it is here. And you can see that it picked the 798 pixel wide version of the image that was specified in the source set. And the reason it did that is, as I explained, this is a 412 pixel wide box, and I'm on a retina display. So it's picking a version that's a good compromise between my bandwidth situation, the width of the image container, and what was provided to it in the source set. And it ended up picking the 798 pixel wide version. And we can see, as we mentioned before, that the size of this is actually substantially less than it was before. Here, it's actually a 20 megabyte image now. And the reason for that is, pardon me, it's actually a 20 kilobyte image now.
Well, and I just think it's very interesting, the idea, like, why would I double the size of this image when I only do 412, right? But it's not only about making sure the image isn't too big. Like, if the image is too small, it actually looks really poor quality, especially like on a phone. Like, it makes me think back to like when you're on your in some new amazing TV you just bought, but you're watching an old movie, and all of a sudden you're like, why did my new amazing TV make this look worse? It's because the newer technology, the screens need so many more pixels to actually make it look good. So you need to double up, triple up the resolution on these images to actually make them look good. And you can especially imagine, like, this is maybe like more of a media or gaming example. Think about e-commerce. If something looks blurry or not good, you're not going to buy it on your phone.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to go over an example from a recent site that was, kind of a fun story as well. So the French Open was happening, and it's called Roland Garros, right? So their website was actually running on a customer of imgix, a headless CMS called Prismic, and they were getting a ton of traffic, as you can imagine, during the French Open, right? So for fun, I swear, for fun, I look at sites and just check to see what their performance
the kind
is.
of guy
it sounds
you are.
Crazy. I know. But I'm looking here, and I know it's imgix, right? And I'm looking, and I see a ton of images that just seem really heavy, and I just can't help but like dig in further and figure out why, and run their page speed scores. And this is kind of like a notorious example I often see at the very bottom. People like including logos, sponsors, whatever they are, right? But they optimized all the images for articles and things like that. Great. Forgot about the logos at the bottom. And those logos, if you don't optimize them, they end up being PNGs. They're extremely heavy. Next thing you know, the page is really, really heavy for images you really didn't care that much about. So I had a look at the score for them, and it was a 61. So here's an example from the page speed test I did with them. And, I reached out to our customer Prismic to let them know, and they reached out to Roland Garros, and they were able to make a change pretty quickly. And you can see the change in the score here. It went from 61 to 76. And wow, that is a big boost, like 15 points just for improving your icons. But the icons, they were really heavy. Like, it was quite a surprise. So it's, kind of a really fun story.
Yeah, and we keep talking about both page speed and this idea of core web vitals. And the interesting thing about those is they require a lot of work and engineering to do well. If you're trying to get from, like a 50s score to a 90s or a 100 score, there's a lot that goes in that. Like, it's a very difficult development kind of project with a lot of moving pieces. imgix and kind of sizing your images correctly, these are very low-hanging fruit that can get you, halfway or more than halfway up that chain, and make huge impacts on your core web vitals kind of measurements and your page speed scores with as little work as possible. Getting that last 10% is going to be very difficult, but imgix makes getting that first 90% so much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, it might not be directly connected, but your browser might be waiting for a big image to download before it gets a piece of JavaScript that it needs to make something interactive, right? So you have to have a holistic picture of website performance, and basically anytime you can think that the user's experience might be impacted, these scores are probably going to be impacted as well. And one of the things with all of these sort of automated or more machine-oriented tests is that they're not always perfect, right? Sometimes you can have a good score for a website that is actually a poor user experience, and vice versa. But what Google has done with the Core Web Vitals is to sort of reset them around real user experience. They've oriented all of these metrics very, very tightly with things that people are going to typically notice. And so we really appreciate that, because I think the change has made it less likely that there will be a site that we've built where we're confident it's giving a good user experience, but because of some arcane thing, it's being impacted for search or something like that, where we have to make a change just because the score is bad and it has nothing to do with the user experience. They seem to be much more tightly coupled now, and that's a good thing. And I wanted to mention about logos. Logos are a really interesting problem to optimize a lot of the time. We tend to use SVGs as much as possible when we're dealing with graphics that can be represented in a vector format. But you have to be really, really careful, because sometimes an SVG will actually end up being larger than the raster image that you might have been able to serve instead, especially when you factor in the compression and different sizing optimizations and things like that you can do with a tool like imgix. So when you're serving logos and anything really that's potentially being uploaded by a content admin in a content management system, it's important to really think through and not just use a certain style of implementation because you typically do, but to really test all the different options. And imgix makes it so easy to test things, because all you have to do is just manipulate the URL and you can get different versions of images, and you can see what the impact of different choices are.
Whenever a new account manager comes to imgix, I'm training them, and I have this one training path, which is images. I know you're going to be surprised to hear that, but literally images 102 is how to size logos, because it's like just such a thing that's easily destroying a website. It's unbelievable. And I wanted to kind of go back and think about the implications for a marketer, like why does the marketer care that these logos are large? Well, it's slowing down this page. So when you were going to the articles and reading the articles, every time it has to load those logos, and it slows down how long it takes when you load each page. And that's just going to eventually cause a user to stop watching or reading articles, right? Or watching videos or anything, right? And obviously, less articles they read is less impressions for advertising, less money, big implications for the marketing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a hard cost in terms of additional bandwidth and infrastructure that you might need. You might need a better server because your images are not being sized correctly, and that's a real cost. But the more insidious and likely more impactful cost is going to be in your user experience. And I don't want to scare people, but one kind of crazy thing about this is that because our analytics tools are JavaScript based, if you have a delay or you have some problem that's causing the front end to load very slowly, you might not even know that person bounced off your website. So you might have someone who clicks on a link, they're waiting for things to load. It takes 2-3 seconds on a mobile device. They're gone. They're no longer interested. The attention span of the average internet user is very, very low. But you would never even know that you missed out on that traffic. So you don't even know all the traffic that you could be gaining by optimizing some of these things. And that's why it's really important to do things properly from the beginning.
Yeah, is the general attention span is like around 2.7 to 3 seconds, right? Like after that, people are...
What?
Like the average, yeah. It's been great discussing best practices for image resizing with you, Ty and Andrew. We have 2 additional videos which will go over how to improve your page speed scores by lazy loading and next-gen image formats. If you would like to try using imgix yourself, we offer a free forever plan, which you can sign up for today at imgix.com. If you would like to get the best help with web design and development consultancy, I would recommend that you go to cantilever.co. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell because we'll have more great content coming out. Thank you both, and hope to see you all at the next episode.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.